Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Situation is constantly developing on the front lines, but no major operational objectives that would significantly influence the whole setup of the battlefield has happened so far. Ukrainians are continuously pushing and they're continuing doing their job. And the first direction that we're going to be looking at right away is the situation around Opitne. And here the development is exactly on the same lines that we outlined before. The situation is developing both in depth towards Verbove. Ukrainians are moving along the trenches and moving towards Verbove to try to clear it. Situation is also developing with Ukrainians going southward along these major trenches. And just recently, we got a confirmation that Ukrainians have indeed also breached trenches in the specifically southern direction, which is just to the east of Novoprokopivka. In Novoprokopivka itself, Ukrainians have also been confirmed in the northern part of the settlement. So overall, you can look at this as there is this whole steady step-by-step push with the pressure that is building up on Russians. Russians are responding with counterattacking and protecting the advances to Verbove. They are counterattacking north from Novoprokopivka, and they are trying to counterattack on the sides, as we were discussing last time, trying to undermine the Ukrainian advances and trying to undermine their desires to widen this breach. Overall, the job is ongoing. As I said a couple of weeks ago, I said that once Ukrainians have made this breach right here, at that moment, it was clear that either Russian defenses are now weak enough and Ukrainians will just continue the breach, or Russians will bring in additional reinforcements. We'll see where Ukrainians are getting through, and then they will throw everything that they have in their counterattacks, trying to undermine that. And only when Ukrainians continuously expand along this front line and accumulate pressure on the wider front, only then, together with a significant attrition, that's when we will see Ukrainians kind of get over this hurdle and move forward. And my estimates were about 2 to 3 weeks probably of attrition, and that was just at the end of August. So like the last days of August. So right now we've been first weeks since the breach of Ukrainians. Therefore, things are happening as I'm expecting, and I'm very glad to see that things are also happening in other directions as well. I've covered specifically last time the direction around Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk, and the situation here is deteriorating for Russians. Novodonetsk is having trouble because it's being kind of circumvented a little bit on the sides, especially because the positions north of Novomayorsk, as shown on this map, have also been compromised. And now Novodonetsk is slowly but surely becoming less secured and less secured by day. This is good. This puts additional pressures on Russians, but again, not yet any major operational objectives are reached to compromise any kind of Russian defense lines in this position. Their defense still holding, but Ukrainians are working on it. An interesting development happened in this area. This is where Ukrainians have a great operation, and they are putting pressures trying to get the Russians out of Opitne. What Ukrainians want to do is they want to make sure that Russians are beyond this line of, it's like a lake and a river chain, so it's like there are reservoirs of water. So Ukrainians want to secure again this natural barrier because it's a very good thing to help them additionally guard and secure tactically the stronghold of Avdiivka, therefore improving tactical positions. However, I've seen some people refer to this as a grand success. I think that's a little bit overhyping it, maybe, because while situation around Robotine, I'm saying, hey, Ukraine takes additional village, this can change the whole operation, how it will go forward. If Ukraine takes even all of this, Pisky, Opitne, Vodene, everything else, this does not significantly change the architecture of the front line. It makes situation for Ukrainians a lot more secure. Their tactical advantages becomes more prominent, especially when we heard recently that around Nevelske, Ukrainians were able to push Russians out as well, because Nevelske is that's a kind of like a last line of defense-ish, if you can think about this way. For Ukrainians, this is where they didn't want Russians to get through, because then it's a very huge flank, and then it compromises the situation in depth very significantly. But Ukrainians were able to push Russians out from Nevelske, which was great. And generally speaking, this is just a tactical situation. So good for Ukrainians. Every square meter of Ukrainian land matters. But for the sake of how well this war is going to develop, doesn't really matter. We get additional discussion about some overhyped pro-Ukrainian supporters who are reporting that Andriivka and Kurdyumivka have been liberated. They have not been liberated. That is false. The same is with Klishchiivka. There are still battles in Klishchiivka. Russians are defending it. And again, I want to underscore that Ukrainians have the dominant heights in this region. Russians here are at a disadvantaged position. So if Russians just continue sending their troops here, firstly, it helps the front lines on the south. Secondly, in this fight, when Russians are sending the troops, their troops are fighting at a disadvantage. So that is a favorable terrain and a position for Ukrainians to fight in. Taking, for example, of Bakhmut would be a propaganda victory for Ukraine as well, in the same sense as it was for Russia, but it's not a major objective. So I don't really believe that Ukrainians right now are looking to capitalize right now on having the dominant heights. Would they want to push Russians a little bit more? Yes. But would they want to dedicate a lot of resources for it? No. With regards to Russian offensive and the north, most of the places are reporting heavy battles. The only minor kind of push from Russians happened around Novoyehorivka, but it was mostly Russians clearing out the gray area and reaching some of the Ukrainian forward positions. So right now, Ukrainian troops are doing a great job at a great cost. This is something that I think I'm very often not underlining well enough. The cost of Ukrainians for doing everything, anything, is tremendous. Ukrainians, good people that are defending their country from an invasion, are being wounded and dying every day. Even if you take the most ludicrous numbers, which I personally don't believe, that for every 8 Russians killed, it's only 1 Ukrainian being killed, then it's still a lot of Ukrainians being dead. So what we need to understand is that, yes, Ukrainians are paying the ultimate price, but they know it. That's why, if I can quickly tackle this, the argument saying, hey, Ukrainians have had 400,000 people killed, which is a completely untrue argument on so many levels. I don't want to dismiss it, because whoever is spouting that nonsense has no connection to truth, and he's not interested in truth. Like, that person is gone, whoever makes that argument. He is so far from reality that he might as well be talking to aliens, or whatever. But the argument is that it's supposedly, if Ukrainians have so many dead, then it's bad. Well, I don't really see. I think it's one of the weakest, if not the weakest, argument of propaganda, mostly because it doesn't really matter. As long as Ukrainians are willing to fight, as long as Ukrainians are finding the manpower and are being, well, eager to fight, well, then they're doing a great job, because Ukrainian spirit still haven't been broken. And they're still getting people. If I judge by 400,000 Ukrainians died, then there are still people that are signing up and going to military to fight for their country. And The next part of that argument was, oh, now they are supposedly subscripting the all of the disabled people and all of the like blind and mentally damaged, which is not true. But there is then the question is, how come Russian military cannot defeat an army of disabled people? It's a self-defeating argument, which is funny on so many levels, but sorry for a little bit of a tangent going on here. What is interesting about the front lines and all of this operation was said in a recent Budanov's interview. And I think that that kind of something that I had at the back of my mind, but I was not certain. We know that current offensive has about, as Mark Milley was stating, about 30 days to 40 days-ish to go until the weather is completely horrible, at which significant movements by the heavy vehicles become problematic because of the Rasputitsa, because of Ukrainian soil turning to the sea of mud. And that is indeed a problem. What on the other side have I seen as well is that Ukrainians right now are using very limited numbers of vehicles. Their efforts to advance very often are not supported by a lot of mechanized forces. Yes, we're seeing a tank or two here and there. We are seeing some of the vehicles driving here and there when they're assaulting. But a lot of times, and this is something that analysts and all over the front line have been describing, Ukrainians are using small forces tactics. Mostly this is due to the fact that the battlefield right now is completely transparent, or because of the drone warfare, because of all of the advanced technologies, which were not present in any other war before this one. And we might actually see weather having less impact for Ukrainians, because one thing is when you're trying to move a massive tank column through the fields of mud. A completely other thing is if it's just a couple of squads of infantry that are moving alongside the trenches. Potentially for that tactic, weather will not be as much of a hurdle, because we've seen as Russians were using not specifically this tactic, they were not fighting like Ukrainians, they were mostly doing the meat wave attacks, but the same infantry attacking pattern, let's put it this way, that it's mostly the infantry fighting, was also conducted during bad weather, and there was also advances made by Russians during bad weather. So what we might see is that when the weather drops, when there is no more potential, like when the weather is bad, the mud is season is there, then we put an absolute period mark on the possibility for a large scale mechanized breakthrough. That is probably going to be a fantasy a little bit, at least how I'm seeing it, remembering how Ukrainian fields are looking like during the rain season. However, what we might see is we might see the continuation of current tactics of Ukrainians of attritioning Russians and having this smaller scale infantry fighting heavily supported by the drone warfare and heavily supported by artillery warfare. And this is interesting, as this is what Budanov has indicated, and this is what certain analysts have saying. So potentially, nothing is going to end for Russians once this offensive is over. However, I'm going to stay true to my word. We're going to still talk at the end of this month about where Ukraine is. Can we consider that this offensive was more of a success or less of a success? We're going to take the good, we're going to take in the bad at the end of the month. But so far, it seems that the things are going well. There is still time, there is still the weather, and Ukraine still have the resources. And I'm working right now maybe on having a special video dedicated to that. In any case, thank you so much for watching this. Thank you so much to moderators, the team. Thank you so much for all of the supporters of the channel. Please support Armed Forces of Ukraine. Go in the links down below. Check out the Discord. I love you all. Slava Ukraini. And we're going to see each other at the end of the week for sure, besides the update videos that I'm going to do, where we're going to do the giveaway of all of the goodies for 100,000 subscribers. See you next time.